He'd come to Yellowstone because there weren't many places left in the world where a man could disappear without anyone noticing, and fewer still where the silence felt like it was on his side. Out here, the only things that remembered his name were his scars and the dog trotting a few paces ahead of him, ears alert, nose low to the ground. The K9 had once worn a vest and a badge, had once moved through city alleys and ruined streets with practiced precision. Now she moved through tall grass and lodgepole pines with the same discipline, as if she just traded one kind of duty for another. He called her Scout, not her original name, but the one that made sense now. He liked that it sounded like a job instead of a person, something to do instead of something to be. The stiffness in his knees complained as they climbed the narrow trail, but he didn't slow. When he walked, the memories stayed behind him. When he stopped, they caught up. So, he kept moving. The park in late summer carried a particular kind of quiet, not empty, but layered. The distant hiss of a thermal vent, the soft rush of wind through pines, the occasional far-off rumble of a distant car on one of the main roads. Civilization pressing its face against the edge of the wild and then thinking better of it. He stayed well away from the popular routes. Tourists with cameras felt like a different species now. Their laughter too loud, their problems too small. Up here, on an overlooked ridge that dropped toward a narrow river valley, he could walk for hours without seeing another human footprint. It had taken him months of drifting to find this place, months of sleeping in the back of his truck, on couches when someone took pity, on cold ground when they didn't. He'd burned through his savings, burned through patience, burned through the last fragile threads, connecting him to the life he'd had before the day. Everything went wrong. Out here, he didn't have to explain why he flinched at certain sounds, or why his eyes scanned for exits in even the safest spaces. Out here, the only thing that judged him was the weather. Scout suddenly stopped. The change was sharp, immediate. 1 second she was pacing ahead. The next, she was a carved statue. Weight shifted forward, nose lifted. A low rumble formed in her chest. Not quite a growl, but the early echo of one. He felt his body respond before his mind did. Heart rate up, muscles taut, focus narrowing. "What is it, girl?" he murmured, instinctively dropping his voice. She flicked an ear back at the sound, then moved off the established trail, sliding between two fallen logs, following something only her nose could read. He hesitated. Off-trail meant risk, unstable ground, hidden dens. The possibility of stumbling onto something big and wild that didn't appreciate visitors. But Scout didn't spook easily. Years of working together had taught him the difference between her curiosity and her alarm. This was neither. It felt closer to insistence, as if she had suddenly remembered something important, and they were late. "Okay," he said quietly. "Lead on." They pushed through underbrush, branches snagging his jacket, the ground soft with old needles. The air cooled as they dropped in elevation. The sun filtered in a patchwork light. He listened for signs of movement beyond their own. Hoofbeats, wings, the soft crash of something large moving away, but heard nothing. Only Scout's steady breath and the occasional clink of his boot against hidden rock. After a few minutes, the trees opened unexpectedly, spilling them into a small clearing that clung half on, half off the ridge. The earth fell away sharply a few yards ahead, forming a raw edge, and beyond that, A view exploded. A river far below, thin and silver. Distant slopes dotted with pines. A blue sky that felt too wide. But it wasn't the view that tightened his breath. It was the tree. It rose from the edge of the cliff like a survivor of some ancient war, its trunk so wide it would have taken 5 men holding hands to encircle it. Lightning had struck it sometime in the past. Once, twice, it was hard to tell, splitting it partially open and leaving a hollow core exposed on the side facing the valley. The top half was long gone, leaving jagged edges that reached toward the sky like broken ribs. But the hollow itself was wrong. Not wrong like decay, wrong like intention. Someone had built inside it. At first, it was just an impression, a strange geometry that didn't belong to trees or storms. Then his eyes adjusted. A wooden door set neatly into the open mouth of the trunk. No frame visible from this angle, just planks fitted so precisely they seemed to grow out of the bark. A small square window had been carved into the wood, faint light glinting off old glass. A cabin, in a tree, balanced at the edge of a cliff. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Scout trotted forward without hesitation, tail low but wagging slowly, as if she'd just found the answer to a question she couldn't ask. He followed more cautiously, testing each step. The area around the trunk felt stable enough, roots still anchored deep, soil firm beneath his boots. Up close, the craftsmanship became clearer. The door was weathered but solid, reinforced with iron straps that had gone dull with age but not yet surrendered to rust. Someone had oiled them once upon a time. Someone had cared. He ran his fingers along the wood, feeling faint patterns carved into it. Not letters, not symbols he recognized, just lines, curves, waves, like someone had tried to capture wind in solid form. "Well," he said softly, "this wasn't on any map." Scout sniffed along the base of the trunk, then stopped at a particular spot where bark met soil, pawing lightly. He knelt, brushing aside leaves. There, half buried, lay an old metal tag, no bigger than his thumb. He picked it up. On one side, someone had stamped a single word, "Morning Star." On the other, a date that made his brow furrow. 1989, the year he was born. That coincidence made his skin prickle. He turned the tag over once more, then slid it into his pocket. "Okay," he murmured. "We're officially in weird territory." The rational part of his mind told him to back away, mark the location on his GPS, and notify a ranger. Structures on parkland were complicated, and anything this hidden probably wasn't exactly legal. But another part of him, the part that had come here to disappear, to stop living by everyone else's rules, leaned forward, fascinated. Somebody had built a secret life inside this tree and had done an excellent job of vanishing behind it. He looked at Scout. "What do you think?" Her tail swished, eyes bright. Decision made. He wrapped his hand around the door handle. It turned easily. No lock, no resistance, as if the door hadn't been opened in years, yet had been waiting to. The interior was dim at first, shaped by the roundness of the trunk, the air cool and dry. He stepped in slowly, letting his eyes adjust. It was smaller than he expected, but also more complete. A narrow cot jutted from one curved wall, neatly made with blankets that had faded but not rotted. A small cast-iron stove occupied one corner, its pipe disappearing through a carefully cut hole above. Next to it, a shelf held tin cups, plates, and a battered kettle. There was a built-in desk carved directly from the tree's interior, smooth from years of use, littered with objects left mid-thought. A compass, a fountain pen, a small stack of notebooks tied with twine. Everything carried a thin layer of dust, but not the suffocating thickness of decades. Years, maybe, not centuries. Scout hopped lightly up onto the cot, sniffing, then settling as if she'd done it 100 times. The sight of the dog relaxing so easily in this strange place made the father's chest ache unexpectedly, like he was intruding not into an abandoned hideout, but into someone's paused life. "Hello?" he called out on instinct, even though he knew no one was here. His voice bounced softly off the curved walls and returned to him hollow and thin. No answer. On the far side of the room, another small window framed a slice of the world outside, the river far below, the open sky, a hawk circling lazily on an updraft. It made the cabin feel less like a hiding place and more like a watchtower, a quiet outpost on the edge of everything. He moved to the desk, fingers brushing the notebooks. Each one was labeled on the spine with a year in small, careful handwriting. 1994, 1995, 1996. There were gaps, a cluster of years, then a missing stretch. More notebooks, a life told in annual fragments. He picked up the one closest to his hand. 2004. The twine around it gave way with a gentle tug. The first page carried a single entry. The ink had faded slightly, but the script was steady. If someone finds this, it means the world kept turning without me. That's good. It means I didn't break it. This tree, it's my apology and my refuge. If it's yours now, be kinder to yourself than I ever was. He stopped reading. The words felt too intimate, like walking into a stranger's confession booth. He wasn't sure he had the right, but the date scrawled at the top of the page pulled him back. July 10th, 2004. The day his unit had taken heavy fire on a mission he still saw every time he closed his eyes too long. He flipped ahead, searching for more clues, something to explain why this date, this place, this tag with his birth year seemed to orbit his own life in quiet circles. Entry after entry painted a picture in slow strokes. The author, a ranger, judging from context, had built the cabin over years of spare hours and stolen lumber, choosing this tree because it had been struck but not killed. Like me, one line read, split open, still standing. The ranger talked about visitors who never knew he was watching from above, about long hikes alone, about the creeping weight of memories he couldn't set down. He wrote about a partner lost in a rock slide, about the guilt that settled afterward like ash, about waking up night after night hearing boulders that no longer moved. The parallels to the father's own nightmares were too sharp. Two men, decades apart, bleeding in the same invisible way. Scout hopped down, came to rest at his feet, sensing his shift in breathing. He knelt, burying his hand in her fur. "I'm okay," he lied, mostly for himself. On a lower shelf beneath the desk, half hidden behind a stack of old field guides, something caught his eye. A metal cash box, the kind you'd see in small-town stores decades ago. His hand paused above it, hovering. For a moment, he considered leaving it untouched. Whatever was inside wasn't his. But then again, none of this was. And yet here he was, breathing in air someone else had once claimed. He pulled the box out. It was heavier than it looked. A small key hung from a nail above the desk, labeled simply, "Box." He used it. Inside were not stacks of money nor neat envelopes addressed to heirs, Instead, there were folded maps, more notebooks, and a worn photograph that stopped him cold. 3 men stood together in front of the same tree cabin, younger, laughing, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The man in the middle wore a ranger uniform. The man on the right wore a military one. The man on the left. The father stared. Same jawline, same eyes, just lighter with youth. A small scar above the eyebrow, identical to the one he saw every morning in mirrors he tried not to look into. He knew this face. He'd seen it in only one place before, framed in a faded picture on his mother's dresser. His father. Not the man who had raised him. The man who hadn't. The ghost who'd left when he was 3 and disappeared into a story nobody liked to tell. Here he was, frozen forever beside a tree that had somehow grown around all of them. The father sank onto the stool, the world tilting slightly. Scout pressed against his leg, anchoring him. The tree creaked softly in the breeze, as if adjusting its weight. The ranger's journal, the military uniform, the date on the tag, the birth year, the hidden cabin. It all arranged itself into a fragile picture he didn't yet know how to hold. This wasn't just a stranger's refuge. Somehow, without meaning to, he had walked straight into the unfinished chapter of his own family's story. And whatever his father had seen inside this cabin years ago had been important enough to carve words into wood, to leave notebooks like breadcrumbs, to trust that one day someone might need them. Someone like him. Someone broken open, still standing. He didn't leave the cabin for a long time. He sat on the narrow stool, elbows on his knees, hands loosely holding the photograph as if it might dissolve if he gripped it too hard. Scout stayed pressed against his side, occasionally lifting her head to rest under his palm, grounding him every time the air inside the tree felt too thin. For most of his life, the man in the picture had been more myth than memory. A rumor with a pulse. A face in a single fading photograph that his mother kept tucked behind other frames, as if hiding it from daylight made the story less painful. Whenever he had asked, her answer had always been the same. He left. It broke him. It wasn't your fault. But now, sitting in the hollow of an ancient tree, holding evidence of a life he never knew existed, he realized she had left out the most important part. His father hadn't disappeared. He had simply retreated, alone, into the only place where the world couldn't reach him. He had built a refuge, or a prison, or both. The father closed his eyes briefly, taking a slow breath as he turned the photograph over. On the back, written in hurried script, were 3 names. Elias, Ranger Unit. Jack, K-9 Division. Matthew, U.S. Army. Matthew, his father's first name. A name the homeless man had not spoken aloud in 20 years. He let the air slip out of his chest and whispered the name like testing how it fit in his mouth. Matthew. It felt like saying a prayer he didn't realize he remembered. But beneath the names was something else. A date. August 12th, 2010. His throat tightened. That year had been a storm of its own. His mother sick, the bills crushing them, the eviction that followed. That was the year he'd started falling into the cracks of life. And while he'd been losing everything, his father had been standing right here, smiling in front of a cabin inside a tree, surrounded by friends. He felt something rise inside him. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter, but heavier. a strange mix of longing and acceptance, as if life had two paths, and he'd spent 20 years walking only one of them, unaware the other had been waiting, carved inside a tree. He set the photo gently on the desk and reached for the notebooks inside the box. Scout lifted her head, ears forward, sensing the shift in him as he opened the first journal. These entries were different from the older ones. The handwriting was more hurried, sentences finished, but sharper. These weren't reflections. They were confessions. I thought I could leave the past behind. Turns out it climbs. The nightmare stopped when I built this place. If my boy ever finds this, I hope he forgives me before he knows me. I wasn't good at staying, but God knows I tried to come back. The father read the last line twice. Tried to come back? But no one had ever shown up. No letter. No message. His mother had waited years before finally letting go. He turned the page. I wrote to her. Once, maybe twice. I don't remember. Fear makes time slippery. He inhaled sharply. The journals were becoming less coherent, less anchored. Some entries rambled, words repeating themselves, thoughts circling. He recognized the pattern. He'd seen it in men who returned from war in another version of a life he once lived himself. But then, one entry froze him. Tomorrow, Elias and Jack leave. I'll be alone again. Maybe that will be enough to make me brave. Maybe the quiet will push me back toward them. I don't want my son to think I vanished without loving him. He swallowed hard. Then another entry, dated 3 days later. Went to see them. Couldn't step out of the car. Watched from the end of the street. He looks like me. His heart hammered. His father had been there? He had been there. Close enough to see him? He closed the notebook, pressing a shaking hand against the cover. Scout nudged his arm, sensing the tremor. So he tried. He whispered. He really tried. He felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. Crying in front of Scout felt wrong, not out of pride, but because she would think he was hurt and spiral into protective mode. So he took a few steady breaths and stayed there until the storm inside softened. When he finally rose, the room seemed to tilt slightly, not from dizziness, but from the weight of everything the notebooks had shifted inside him. He walked to the small window, resting his hand against the edge of the carved frame. From here, the world looked like something worth staying in. 1,000 miles of green, cut by a silver river that slithered between cliffs and valleys. The sky stretched wide, as if held up by nothing but air and hope. He understood why Matthew had stayed, and why he hadn't gone home. The man opened the stove's iron door out of habit. Inside, stuffed into the back, was a folded cloth pouch. Scout lifted her head sharply, nose twitching. He pulled the pouch free. It jingled faintly. Inside were 6 gold coins, old, heavy, engraved with symbols he didn't recognize. Not currency, not modern. And beneath them, a folded letter. His father's, handwriting again. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. If you are reading this, it means I failed to return. But it also means you found the one place where the world didn't break me. This place is yours now. Everything here is. But the real gift isn't the tree. It's the trail I left behind. Follow it. You'll find what mattered most to me, and maybe what's been missing in you too. There was a map drawn below the words, a rough sketch, but detailed enough for him to recognize landmarks. The cliff, the ridge, the river bend, and a red X. Not far from here. Scout barked softly, tail thumping once against the wood. He closed the letter slowly. Looks like we're not done, he said quietly. Scout's ears perked. He slipped the coins back into the pouch, tied it to his belt, slung the notebooks into his pack, and stepped back out into the golden wash of late afternoon. The door clicked softly behind him, sealing the cabin again. He stood on the ridge for a long moment, breathing in the wild scent of pines and warm earth. The father spoke aloud, not to Scout, not to the forest, but to the man he never met properly. I'm here, Dad. I'm finally here. Then he tightened his pack straps. Come on, girl, he said. And together, they started toward the X on the map, toward whatever truth Matthew Morningstar had left behind, toward the ending of a story that had waited 20 years for someone to walk into it. The morning broke softly, as if the sun itself hesitated before spilling over the jagged horizon. The homeless man, though the word felt less and less true with every breath he took of this place, stood on the ridge with Scout beside him, the map clutched in one hand, the letter in the other. Below them, the valley stretched endlessly, painted in hues of gold and deep evergreen, the river cutting through like a silver blade. He had slept poorly, dreams flickering like old film reels, his father's face, the cabin's glow, the weight of questions he'd carried most of his life. But despite that, he felt more awake than he had in years, more present, as if every breath here belonged to a version of himself he had almost forgotten existed. The red X on the map was etched faintly but deliberately. A short hike down from the ridge, past the curve of the river, then up a narrow trail that vanished behind a cluster of boulders. Scout paced impatiently at his feet, her nose twitching toward the path. She sensed the next page of their story long before he moved. All right, he murmured, tightening the straps of his pack. Lead on, girl. They descended the ridge slowly, the late morning air already warming. The trail was narrow, overgrown in parts, suggesting it hadn't been walked in years, not even by wildlife. Scout paused occasionally, sniffing the air, then pulling ahead with renewed certainty. The man followed, trusting her instincts more than his own. Eventually, they reached the boulders, massive slabs of stone leaning into each other, forming a half-hidden archway. The map suggested something beyond them, something his father wanted him to see. Scout slipped through the narrow gap first, tail high with anticipation. The man ducked under the stone and emerged into a small clearing he never would have found on his own. Sunlight filtered through a broken canopy of branches, illuminating a single stump in the center. But it wasn't a stump. Not really. It was a hatch, round metal, covered in leaves and dirt. He approached slowly, heart pounding. There was no lock, no visible handle, just an indentation where someone, years ago, must have pushed it open by hand. He knelt beside it, brushing away debris. Scout whined softly, circling the hatch, her tail dropping as if the air itself carried echoes. The man inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment press into him. His father had built a hidden cabin inside a tree. Why wouldn't he have built one underground too? He pressed his palm into the indentation. The hatch groaned, then lifted just enough for him to grip the edge. With a strained exhale, he pushed it upward. It opened with a heavy metallic sigh, sending dust spiraling into the air. Inside, a ladder disappeared into darkness. He looked at Scout. She sat, ears perked, waiting. "Guess we're doing this," he whispered. He clipped a small flashlight to his jacket and began climbing down. Scout waited until he called her, then expertly navigated a spiral of footholds built into the side of the shaft. Another sign that this was never meant to be sealed forever. The air inside was cool, untouched, carrying faint traces of cedar and dust. When they reached the bottom, the man flicked on his flashlight. A small room came into view. Not a bunker, not a panic shelter. A studio, a desk, 2 chairs, shelves lined with old wooden boxes, and on the far wall, a giant map carved directly into stone. He stepped toward it slowly. Scout stayed close, her head brushing his hand. The map was a masterpiece, a detailed carving of the entire Yellowstone region, marked with trails, coordinates, and notes etched into the rock with the precision of someone who had walked every inch of it. And at the bottom, chiseled into the stone. "For when he grows strong enough to follow." His throat tightened. The idea that his father, who struggled with fear so deep it caged him inside wilderness, had spent hours, maybe years, crafting this for a son he wasn't sure would ever come. It shook him. His flashlight beam moved across the wall. Near the carving hung a metal container. He lifted it, surprised by its weight. Inside were dozens of old film canisters, each labeled by date and location. Ranger unit footage, K9 division logs, personal recordings. He felt the air leave his lungs. His father had documented everything. "You wanted me to see your life," he whispered. "You just didn't know how." Scout nudged his leg, sensing the tremble in his voice. The man sat down slowly at the desk. There was an old projector, dusty but intact. He loaded one of the reels, heart hammering, and clicked the switch. The wall lit up with a jittery image. A younger Matthew Morningstar appeared, smiling shyly at the camera. His hair was longer, face fuller, eyes bright, before whatever broke him had settled in. "Testing. Testing." Matthew's voice crackled. "Elias says I need to document things. Says it helps." He laughed softly. "Not sure anything helps, but, here we are." The man felt tears prick his eyes. Matthew pointed the camera toward the wilderness. "Our unit found something strange today. A cave deep in the cliffs. Might be nothing. Might be something worth studying. Either way, I'm keeping this for my kid, in case I ever find the courage to go back." "In case I ever find the courage." The man lowered his head, pressing his fingers to his forehead. Scout whined again, placing her paw on his knee. He clicked to the next clip. Now Matthew looked older, tired, but softer, somehow. "If you ever see this," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. I loved you, even when I wasn't there. Even when I was too broken to walk into the same room as the people I loved. I hope you understand one day." The screen flickered. "I built something for you," Matthew added. "Something out there. If you follow the main trail north from the ridge, look for the stone marker. You'll know when you see it." The reel ended abruptly. The man sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall, feeling years of silence dissolve into something softer, something like forgiveness. He finally rose. Scout followed as he crossed the room and searched the shelves until his fingers brushed against rough stone. A carved marker, matching the symbols on the map. A trail north. A promise left unfinished. He packed the marker and films into his bag, climbed the ladder with Scout close behind, and emerged into the sunlight, squinting as if the world had changed its brightness while he was underground. Maybe it had. The trail north was steep and winding. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of amber and deep rose. Scout led confidently, sometimes trotting ahead, sometimes checking back with a quick bark or tail wag, as if urging him to stay strong. Finally, as dusk set in, they found it. A stone marker, half covered in moss, but unmistakable, an identical twin to the one he carried in his pack. And beside it, buried beneath branches and leaves, was a weather-worn wooden chest. Not modern, not military. Something older. Scout barked sharply, pawing at the dirt. The man knelt, cleared the debris, and lifted the chest. It was surprisingly light. He brushed off the dirt, then unclasped the rusted latch. Inside were stacks of neatly sealed envelopes, each marked with his initials. Letters, dozens of them, some old, some newer. He opened the top one. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but writing keeps me alive." He opened another. "I came to your school once. You looked happy. I didn't want to ruin that." Another. "I'm sorry I didn't come back. I'm sorry I wasn't brave." The last envelope was thicker. Inside was a deed. Ownership of several acres of land, stretching miles around the cliffside cabin. Land worth far more than he had ever imagined. Enough to give him a life. Enough to give him a home. Enough to start over. His father had not left him nothing. He had left him everything he could. The man sat back on the ground, overwhelmed. Scout curled against him, pressing her warm body into his side. He rested his forehead on the dog's head and let the quiet surround them. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to God, to fate, or to a man he wished he had known. "I needed this more than you'll ever know." Above them, the stars emerged one by one, piercing through the darkening sky. The forest shifted around them, alive and humming with a kind of ancient peace. For the first time since his mother's death, the man felt a strange and steady warmth settle in his chest. Not certainty, not closure, but something gentler, belonging. He gathered the chest, the letters, and the deed. Scout nudged the map in his pocket, reminding him there was still one place left unresolved, the cabin in the tree, the place where everything had begun. "Let's go home," he said softly, and for the first time in years, he meant it. They walked back under the moonlit sky, the wilderness opening before them like a story that had waited decades to be finished. And as they approached the glowing outline of the ancient tree cabin, the man realized something. He had not just inherited land, not just a cabin, not just secrets. He had inherited a father's final attempt at love, and he would carry it forward, one step, one breath, one sunrise at a time.